Everyone. So I'm definitely doing this from the comfort of my own home, of course. But for the vlog, I'm going to be talking about Green Book, which just kind of go through it. The plot of it is, in 1962, Dr. Don Shirley, played by Mahershala Ali, was an African American concert pianist, and he hired Tony Lip, Tony Vallelonga, played by Viggo Mortensen, to drive him and to be security for him as he went on his concert tour through the Deep South. And of course, throughout the film, despite their differences with each other, the two men develop a bond with each other while confronting, the racism and the danger they face throughout their journey. Um, so to kind of expand on that, the film deals with racial and gender issues in different ways. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have saw the film. I know some of you are probably going to be commenting on the film. Personally, it left a kind of a bitter taste in my mouth. Personally, it wasn't. It was a decent film. It was a pretty good film. I did like some bits and pieces of it, but as an overall film, and even too as a Best Picture winner, I just didn't. That just didn't sit right with me. Dr. Ewan talked about colorblind racism throughout the book, but even like specifically to name a reference in page 138. And to me, that's what it kind of felt like, is it was colorblind to the things that actually people in the Deep South had to face, African Americans specifically, and like I think it just was a hazy gloss over the actual occurrences that happened for the film, especially with the role reversal, sort of like from Driving Miss Daisy, of a white driver now driving the African American talent, and I think to me it did its best. Like it was almost like the studio trying to use diversity for money, or to like sell, kind of like how maybe to like nudge at some people, how Nike's been doing with the Kaepernick issues. Like these are like real things happening. These are really important issues to be talked about. But it's like, is it a business just utilizing that for the sake of ticket sales or for the sake of award sales? So, and you wish that wasn't the case, but it possibly could be, and I think it might have been the case specifically for Green Book. At least that's how it felt. Um, the story also glosses over the fact that he was, that Dr. Don Shirley, again played by Mahershala Ali, was indeed a homosexual. One scene maybe for 30 seconds, and then it was almost like never talked about again. At least not specifically. I don't even think, even in that moment, it was just two naked men in the shower as the cops were there and stuff like that. And he bailed them out. Viggo Mortensen bailed them out. But at the most, for the most cases, that was never referenced again. For the most part, it was never talked about blatantly or specifically. There might have been like some like through dialogue reference to that sequence happening, but like it was never talked. It was, in the years of Shape of Water, Moonlight, Call Me by Your Name, stories of that. It's weird to have a film that glosses over that issue and yet still receives so much love when other films have done it, and I think done a much better job, at least in my personal opinion, of course. Um, on the next page, in page 139, Dr. Yoon also talks about like the saturation, or like how culture nowadays is media saturated, and we definitely see that with like Twitter and stuff like that. But Twitter blew up. Green Book. I don't know if anyone followed. I'm a huge Twitter guy. I'm always on Twitter. I always like to get my news and see what's happening specifically in the film world through Twitter. And all the stuff about Peter Farrelly came out about like his sex scandal, that the writers of the movie were undergoing some like racist comments and stuff. Like they said some things, as well as Mahershala Ali having to apologize to the actual family of Dr. Don Shirley, saying like, I'm sorry that the film portrayed your relative in this way, and I'm sorry that I took part in that. I didn't know. Like he just straight up apologized about it. And however, I guess even when the media blew that up and like perpetuated that, that's changed lives. Like James Gunn's getting firing. The media is so good, especially on Twitter, raising awareness about certain issues, and things have changed because of it, for the better, sometimes even for the worse. And I think for this case, it was really weird when like a film was being so attacked, even Bohemian Rhapsody, but that film's not on the list. Um, and yet it's still winning. It still won. I think it walked home with like three, maybe four Oscars, which was nuts to me. I didn't believe it. Spike Lee made some hilarious comments about that. If any of you guys watched the Oscars, um, yeah, if anything, I think the film perpetuated even more stereotypes of, for example, blacks and chickens. Like the fact that like there was a whole scene where Viggo Mortensen talked about like, oh, your people love the chicken. Oh, your people love the fried chicken. And it was like, it was supposed to be a scene of like deconstructing of the stereotypes. Like, oh, like it is a well-known fact that African Americans like chicken, and yet there was this Dr. Don Shirley character who was like, I don't know anything about black culture. I don't know anything about the fried chicken, or I don't know anything about Little Richard. And I think Little Richard was referenced as well in that scene. And I think while the scene tried to have good taste in that, I don't think it came off across like that. And I think it was very, to me, it was very, it, as watching as a white guy, I think I even felt like this doesn't seem right. Like this doesn't seem like this was handled well at all. Like this feels like anything. It took a step backwards from. It felt like there could have been a more graceful and artistic way of trying to deconstruct these stereotypes. Instead, I think if anything, it perpetuated them even more, which I think was. Ron, like I said, it skimmed over his whole gay background, which was, I think, could have been such a huge development and a character insight for Dr. Don Shirley. But it was like, it referenced one scene of it and then moved on. And I think to that, it had so much potential to create this Dr. Don Shirley character, much more complex, fighting with such much more internal issues. But I think the film said like, oh, if we give you a taste of that, then it's going to pay off. Like then you'll know a little bit more. And I just don't think it did that, at least well. The film's almost like it's trying to say like, hey, look, white people can change. Like, look, you don't have to be, because the film starts out with Viggo Mortensen's character, throwing away the glasses that two African American plumbers drank out of at his home when they were fixing some pipes and stuff like that. And then at the end of the movie, spoiler alert if anyone's watching, like at the end of the movie, Dr. Don Shirley comes and eats dinner with him and his family, and there's none of that is any resonant at all with anything that just happened. Like he made a complete 180, so to say. Even furthermore, on page 142, it talks about diversifying for business. I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, and how imperative that is. And I think in the movie, it's kind of weird to think that way, but then also think that like the movie was produced, written, directed for most of the crew was white guys. I mean, when they accept, I mean, if you want to look it up, if you want to look up the Green Book Best Picture picture from the Oscars, everyone on stage besides Mahershala Ali and I think Octavia Spencer, I think who was like one of the executive producers, one of the producers, everyone else was of white descent. And in a movie like that, I think that just doesn't do the story of Dr. Don Shirley justice. And so many people have commented. You can look up Spike Lee's comments on this. You can look up a lot of people's comments of the film being using almost this African American character and his like such diverse background, and like it's such an interesting story, but then focusing on the white guy of the story, it almost creates this this complex idea of like a white savior. And I think even Dr. Ewan retweeted something, or at least I saw it on Twitter, of like this guy who kind of takes you through like a vlog kind of like this about white knights throughout film history and stuff like that. And it was a really interesting, it was like a minute 40-second video of a guy talking about like specifically Green Book and a lot of different films that have perpetuated that film trope, which I think should be done and rid of. And again, maybe if you can do it in an artistic way that is uplifting to everyone involved, I think that's smart. But for the most case, at least in this film, it just didn't feel that way. And like I said too, the real family didn't even, in a sense, agree with the portrayal of Dr. Don Shirley, and the fact that Mahershala Ali had to apologize, I think, was just absolutely insane. And I mean, as I mentioned some of those, and I kind of brought in with how that deals with racial gender issues, those were also surprising, interesting, and disturbing details, as we're supposed to do in this segment to talk about. Those all were part of that as well. Like I was, there was like specific scenes. Like there's a moment. It's like, why would Viggo Mortensen pull out a gun at the end of the movie when they were confronted by black thieves after Dr. Don Shirley just played into a predominantly African American bar, and then he's like, "Oh, I knew you had a gun." But like early in the film, when Dr. Don Shirley was getting beat up by these white guys, he faked that he had a gun, never pulled it out. And to me, there was just like that weird. I don't know if I'm like wrong in this, but it just felt like this weird like, why then, like why now, type of thing, as well as like there was just some cringy scenes that I'm like, I don't know if that was just done correctly. And I wish I had like more words to say why, but like it just left this weird bitter taste in my mouth. Like when Viggo Mortensen was saying like, "Oh, you like live in this castle. I know black people. I'm more black than you." And Dr. Don Shirley is like, "Well, if I'm not black enough and I'm not white enough, then tell me, Tony, what am I?" And I think that line in and of itself is a beautiful line, but given the context of what Tony had just said, given the context of the rest of the film, it just didn't land anymore. I remember watching it in the trailer and being like, "That's going to be a powerful scene. That's going to be like that could be really well done." And then when I watched it in theaters, I was like, it didn't land because of everything else that I've seen that just didn't make sense, perpetuating the story of Doctor Shirley, um, and that whole idea of he's not black enough. And I think that's such a good commentary to have in the film in itself, but I think it needs to be done right. And giving that to a guy like Peter Farrelly, I just don't think. I think it should have been given to the hands of someone like, I think Spike Lee could have told an amazing story about, um, those issues within the African American community, but like giving it to having the focal lens of Viggo Mortensen, because Viggo Mortensen was up for Best Leading Actor when Mahershala Ali was Best Supporting again, and I think switching the two maybe could have made for a better film or a better well told film. But again, it was white guys writing and directing the story about like how white people are involved in this story and how they can be changed for the better. Like they're no longer racist, um, and it just didn't sit right. It just didn't. I don't think it landed like how it should. Like I keep saying, but in an article from Roger Ebert written by Christy Lemire, she loved the film. Apparently, she was all over. And I've heard a lot of people who genuinely like the film and they give their rationale why, and I resonate with some of it. But she said, she highlighted the point that it was supposed to be a film about like how they're not so different at all. And I think that idea of like, here's these two drastically different people with drastically different backgrounds, and yet at the end of the film they found out that they're not so different at all. I think that premise is beautiful. I think that's such a beautiful thing. But I think, and I hope those can agree with me when they watch the film, that it just didn't land in that way. It didn't touch it in a very graceful manner that these two were very much alike in the first place. Um, and again, I want to expand even more and more on it, but it's just like I don't want to go on this tangent as I already am and just like keep going. And then I realize it's a 15-minute video, but these are just things that I'm thinking about as I'm like reading through and as I rewatch the film and everything like that. Um, she also quoted that the film is supposed to give a brief glimmer of hope. For the most part, I think it did kind of do well in that, like, hey, like, we can change. It just takes getting to know people. It just takes getting to know that person of a different background that maybe you disagree with or didn't have, many good thoughts about early on. But once you get to know a person, you can be changed, and I think that's a hopeful thing. And I think that's a hopeful message. But again, consistent throughout the film, it didn't build up to a graceful landing of that. But again, like at the core of the film, it tried to be these great, great things and deliver such a great, great message. But I think the the delivery of the film just didn't do that as well as I think it could have, which is, it's a little upsetting. But again, some people think that it did land and everything consistently that it was perfect. But not every film's for everyone. And that's totally perfect. Again, the racial flip of Driving Miss Daisy, Daisy and Spike Lee, of course, made hilarious comments on that. And another thing that Christy Lemire quoted was that Viggo Mortensen was this like brash, affable guy. Can't say that word. But he's like lovable and he's all these things because he's so quirky and there's humorous moments and like he's got a funny accent, all these different things. And it's weird to comment that he's these things when at the beginning of the film he was like blatantly racist, where it's like, I don't even want the glasses in my house that these two African Americans drank out of. And yet all of a sudden he's like driving for this guy and he's completely okay with it. And like, I mean, he had some remorse against it at first, but like, it was a really weird transition. It was really weird. I don't think we should be calling Tony an affable and like lovable guy. Like, to me, he wasn't that way. He was really brash by throwing those glasses away. Like, and yet he's like making jokes like 10 minutes later and like, oh, we're back to loving him again. I think the film just overall just did a glossing of these things. Um, and like, yeah, so like I'm kind of going on this tangent, but that's what I kind of get the point. It's like there was no real scene or moment of change for Tony, to me, and I think that was a little disturbing. It's like by the end he reached this point, and it was like, but when did he like? When was that moment of like when he realized that like this is it? Like, what if I'm so wrong for doing this? And he never. There was no moment of that of him going like, I'm so sorry, like Dr. Shirley, like I was this way and like now I'm not, and like you've helped me change. It just kind of like happens, and we were just like kind of supposed to accept it, like it was like gonna happen. We all knew it was gonna happen. Like, so to me that was kind of like disappointing. Was like there was that not moment, and that was kind of surprising to me as well. Um, it first shows Dr. Shirley like on his throne with all his jewels, and Tony's kind of taken back by this, and he even mentions it later. And yet he has this hidden complexity inside, that he's actually a broken human being inside of his huge castle. And again, it tried its best to flip that stereotype. And to some people, again, they might comment on this and say, "I think that actually worked." And to them, yeah, like I completely understand your rationale if you do think that. But to me personally, it just didn't feel like it was coming across in the best manner by doing these things. Um, and again, Christy Lemire said their distinct opinions on fried chicken and Little Richard defy traditional stereotypes. And I've said it multiple times before. I just didn't think that was the case. I didn't think that. I think it was almost cheesy by doing that. I think like with like these great artistic films like Moonlight, Black Panther, Call Me by Your Name for the LGBTQ, Shape of Water. Um, there's a lot of films in recent history from like past years that like have really tackled these types of issues in a very artistic manner, where it's like this was like really well done, and I felt this like human experience of it all, even though I'm again a straight white male. um, but I was like watching it from this movie, it felt like really cornily done. Like it was like it felt like um, an old white man trying his best at like, see, look, I'm involved in, like I know what this is, I know what like here's that stereotype, that let me flip it on its head. And it just didn't feel like this, like there wasn't like an artistic integrity in it, which I and again, this is all personal opinion of course, but like that's just how I felt. um, when I was like watching the film and stuff. And I wish it was different, but that's just how it is. So yeah, I hope you guys and I'd love to hear you guys' opinions. I'm sure some of you are gonna possibly agree with me and say like, oh, I kind of felt that way too, and possibly another half says I actually disagree with you, and I think that those things were really well done, and I accept both because I've heard both so often, and I've there's no point in arguing, because there's as Paul Thomas Anderson said best, like there's no reason to say we hate films. If anything, some films are not for us. And to me, at the end of the day, Green Book was just not a film for me. Again, there were some parts of it I liked, but at the end of the day, it wasn't a film for me. So yeah, thank you guys.